The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the thin wool of her tunic and claws that scraped her skin raw. Alara hunched her shoulders, pulling the threadbare fabric tighter around her frail form, but it was useless. The wind, a relentless predator, found every seam and opening, stealing what little warmth she possessed. Her fingers were numb, clumsy things that fumbled with the heavy iron handle of the bucket. Water sloshed over the rim, instantly freezing in a crystalline sheet on the unforgiving stone of the courtyard. She was an Omega, the lowest of the low in the Blood Moon pack. A ghost. Less than a ghost. Ghosts were at least remembered. She was simply ignored. A piece of furniture to be kicked when it was in the way, a vessel for chores no one else wanted. Orphaned, powerless, and marked by a shame that was not her own, she had learned to make herself small, to fold into the shadows and pray for invisibility. It was her only defense. Her parents had been accused of treason, of conspiring with the Ember Covenant, a shadowy faction that sought to unravel the ancient pacts. They were executed before she could even walk, and their stain had seeped into her skin, marking her for a life of servitude and scorn. She carried their supposed sins like a shroud. "Look at the rat, scurrying in the cold." The voice was sharp, laced with the casual cruelty Alara knew so well. Lyra, the Pack Alpha's daughter, stood on the covered veranda, flanked by her sycophants. She was beautiful, with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of a summer sky, but her heart was a shard of ice. Alara kept her head down, her gaze fixed on the spreading patch of ice at her feet. Don't look up, don't engage, don't give them a target. These were the rules she lived by. A rock skipped across the stone and struck her ankle. The pain was a sharp, biting thing, but she bit her lip to swallow the cry. Showing weakness was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. It only invited a frenzy. "Did you hear me, filth?" Lyra's voice was closer now. The scent of expensive oils and warm fur filled the air, a stark contrast to the grime and cold that clung to Alara. "I asked you a question." "Yes," Alara whispered, the word a puff of white in the frigid air. "Yes, what?" Another girl, Mara, chimed in, her laughter like tinkling glass. "Yes, Alpha daughter," Alara mumbled, the title tasting like ash in her mouth. Lyra's fine leather boot nudged the bucket, tipping it. The rest of the water spilled out, a gushing wave that soaked the hem of Alara's tunic and splashed against her bare legs. The cold was instantaneous and shocking. It felt like being stabbed with 1,000 tiny needles. "Clumsy," Lyra said with a dismissive sniff. "Now you'll have to go back to the well and fetch more. And be quick about it. The kitchens need water for the evening meal." Alara gritted her teeth. The well was a quarter-mile away, and the sun was already bleeding into the horizon, painting the bruised sky in shades of orange and purple. The temperature was dropping fast. Another trip meant more time in the biting wind, more pain for her already frozen hands and feet. But she didn't have a choice. She nodded, her chin tucked so low it nearly touched her chest. She turned to pick up the empty bucket, her whole body trembling, not just from the cold, but from the effort of holding her frayed dignity together. As she walked away, their laughter followed her, sharp and cruel as the wind. She focused on the rhythm of her own breathing, on the crunch of her worn boots on the snow-dusted path. She would not break. She would not cry. They had taken everything from her, her family, her name, her worth. But they would not take this. This small, stubborn core of resilience was all she had left. She would fetch the water, she would finish her chores, and she would survive until the morning. It was the only promise she could make to herself. The path to the well was treacherous, winding through a copse of skeletal trees whose branches clawed at the sky. Snow began to fall, Not the gentle, fluffy flakes of stories, but hard, stinging pellets driven by the strengthening wind. A blizzard. The thought sent a spike of real fear through her. The pack's elders had been muttering about this storm for days, a white maw that would swallow the mountains. She had thought it was just superstition. She was wrong. The wind howled, a mournful, hungry sound that seemed to come from the throat of the world itself. It whipped her hair across her face, stinging her cheeks. The snow thickened, a swirling vortex of white that erased the world around her. The path vanished. The trees became indistinct smudges of gray. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle beneath her skin. She was lost. She pushed forward, one agonizing step at a time, the empty bucket a dead weight in her frozen hand. Her lungs burned with every breath of icy air. How could she have been so stupid? She should have waited, should have defied Lyra. But defiance was a luxury she couldn't afford. It would have earned her a beating, or worse, a night locked in the ice shed. Her foot caught on a hidden root and she pitched forward, landing hard in a deep drift of snow. The impact knocked the wind from her. For a moment she just lay there, the snow seeping into her clothes, the cold a crushing weight. It would be so easy to give up. So easy to close her eyes and let the white silence take her. No more chores, no more taunts, no more pain. No. The word was a silent scream in her mind. She would not die like this. Not for them. Not for anyone. With a groan, she pushed herself up, her muscles screaming in protest. She had no idea which way the pack house was. The blizzard had stolen all sense of direction. Every way she looked was the same churning wall of white. She chose a direction at random and stumbled forward, driven by nothing but a primal need to survive. She walked for what felt like hours, the world a blur of snow and shadow. The cold was no longer just on her skin. It was in her bones, a deep, aching chill that was slowly extinguishing the flame of her life. Her thoughts grew sluggish, her movements clumsy. She was falling, and she knew it. Then, through the blinding snow, she saw it. A light. A faint, flickering glow, warm and golden, impossibly out of place in this frozen hell. Hope, fierce and desperate, surged through her. She staggered toward it, her legs leaden, her vision tunneling. It was a cave, a dark slash in the side of a rock face, the light spilling from its mouth. She practically fell inside, collapsing onto the stone floor, her body racked with shudders. The warmth was a shock to her system, a blessed relief that was almost painful. A fire crackled in a makeshift pit, casting dancing shadows on the cave walls, and beside the fire, a figure sat. He was massive, a silhouette of broad shoulders and raw power that seemed to suck the very air from the cave. He had not moved when she entered, had not made a sound. She could not see his face, hidden as it was in the deep shadows cast by the fire, but she could feel his presence. It was an immense, ancient pressure, like the weight of a mountain. Fear, sharp and immediate, cut through the fog of her exhaustion. She had stumbled from one danger into another. This was no lost traveler. This was a predator. She tried to scramble back, to flee into the storm she had just escaped, but her limbs would not obey. He finally moved, his head turning slowly toward her. 2 points of light ignited in the darkness of his face. Eyes. They glowed with an internal fire, the color of molten gold. They fixed on her, and the world fell away. The roaring wind, the crackling fire, the biting cold in her bones, it all vanished, replaced by the intensity of that gaze. He rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, a giant carved from stone and shadow. He took a step toward her and she flinched, curling into herself on the floor. This was it. This was how she died, not in the cold, but at the hands of this monster. He stopped a few feet away, his golden eyes scanning her from head to toe. She could feel his gaze like a physical touch, peeling back the layers of grime and fear, seeing the broken, worthless thing she was. She waited for the blow, for the snarl of contempt, for the end. But it never came. Instead, he knelt. The movement was so unexpected it stunned her. He reached out a hand, large enough to crush her skull, and gently brushed a snow-caked strand of hair from her face. His fingers were warm, the calloused skin surprisingly soft against her frozen cheek. The moment his skin touched hers, the world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A cataclysm of energy surged through her, a bolt of lightning that struck the deepest part of her soul. Heat, searing and white-hot, flooded her veins, chasing out the cold. It was agonizing, a pain so profound it felt like she was being ripped apart and remade, atom by atom. She screamed, a raw, ragged sound torn from her throat. On the back of her hand, a mark began to burn itself into existence. Lines of silver light swirled and coalesced, forming an intricate pattern of a crescent moon cradling a single, blooming star. It glowed with a fierce, ethereal light, the pain of its creation unbearable. The man, the Alpha King, though she did not know it then, jerked his hand back as if he too had been burned. His golden eyes were wide, fixed on the glowing mark on her hand. A sound escaped his lips, a low, guttural rumble that was equal parts shock, disbelief, and something else. Something ancient and possessive. "You," he breathed, his voice deep as thunder and soft as velvet. It resonated in her bones, in the very marrow of her being. What was happening? The pain was already receding, replaced by a thrumming energy she had never felt before. A connection. It was a living cord of light and warmth, stretching from the mark on her hand to the giant of a man before her. She could feel him. Not just his presence, but his emotions. The staggering awe, the fierce, overwhelming protectiveness, the bone-deep loneliness that had haunted him for centuries, now suddenly, miraculously, soothed. Mine. The word was not a question or a claim. It was a statement of absolute, unchangeable fact. Like stating the sun rose in the east or the stars shone in the night sky. He said it as if he had waited an eternity to do so. Elara stared at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind, conditioned by a lifetime of worthlessness, could not process it. Fear warred with a strange, burgeoning sense of belonging. Her body, her very soul, recognized him. It strained toward him like a flower to the sun, while her conscious mind screamed at her to run, to hide. This was impossible. This was a mistake. He was the Alpha King. Kale. A name whispered in equal parts reverence and terror, a being of mythic power who ruled all the packs, ancient and unforgiving. And she was nothing, a trampled weed. The universe did not make mistakes like this. He saw the terror in her eyes, the confusion that was tearing her apart. His harsh, predatorily beautiful features softened. The harsh lines of his face, carved by centuries of war and solitude, seemed to melt away, revealing a tenderness she could not comprehend. "I have you," he said, his voice a low promise. He reached for her again, slowly this time, giving her a chance to pull away. She flinched but did not move. His hand cupped her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheek. The connection between them flared, warm and intoxicating. What are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. A smile touched his lips, a rare, breathtaking thing like the first sunrise after a long winter. "I am yours," he said simply. "And you are mine. I have been waiting for you, little moon." Little Moon. The name settled over her, a warm blanket against the cold of her past. She should have been terrified. She was. But beneath the fear, a seed of hope, something she thought had died long ago, began to sprout. This man, this impossible king, looked at her not as a worthless Omega, not as the daughter of traitors, but as something precious, something he had been searching for. He gently lifted her from the floor, handling her as if she were made of spun glass. He carried her to the fire and settled her onto a pile of thick furs she hadn't noticed before. He wrapped one around her, the warmth divine. "Sit down," he commanded softly, though it was less an order and more a plea for her to accept his care. He took her frozen hands in his large palms engulfing them, and breathed on them. His breath was warm, smelling of pine and winter storms. The feeling slowly, painfully, returned to her fingers. She watched him, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. The glowing mark on her hand had faded to a delicate, silvery tattoo, a permanent brand that tied her to this man, a soul bond. The legends were true. It was a connection forged by fate itself, a bond deeper than blood, more absolute than any vow. And it had happened to her. Her entire life had been defined by what she lacked: power, status, love, worth. Now, in a single, cataclysmic moment, this stranger was offering her everything. But her mind could not accept it. She was Alara, the outcast, the filth Lyra and the others saw. How could she be his, the queen to his king? It was a fantasy, a cruel dream from which she would surely wake. But the warmth of his hands was real. The silver mark on her skin was real. And the profound, undeniable connection humming between them was the most real thing she had ever known. They spent the night in the cave as the blizzard raged outside, a cocoon of warmth and bewildering intimacy. He did not press her, did not demand answers or explanations. He simply sat with her, his presence a solid, comforting wall against the world. He shared his rations of dried meat and hard bread, food that tasted better than any feast she had ever been allowed to scavenge. For the first time in her memory, she was not hungry. She was not cold. She was not alone. The morning broke clear and cold, the world outside draped in a pristine blanket of white. The silence was profound. Kale stood at the mouth of the cave, a dark silhouette against the blinding snow. "The storm has passed," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We can travel." "We." The word sent a tremor through her. Her brief respite was over. Now came the reality. He would take her back to the Blood Moon Pack. What would they do when they saw her with him? When they saw the mark? The old fear returned, coiling in her stomach. Lyra's sneering face swam in her vision. The Alpha's cold, dismissive eyes. They would never accept this. They would call her a liar, a whore who had somehow tricked the Alpha King. They would tear her apart. As if sensing her turmoil, Kale turned to her, his golden eyes searching her face. "You are afraid," he stated. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He crossed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He knelt before her again, taking her marked hand in his. He pressed his lips to the silver emblem, and a jolt of pure, unadulterated pleasure shot up her arm. It stole her breath. "No one will ever harm you again," he vowed, his gaze burning with a fierce, protective fire. "You are my mate, my queen. They will kneel to you, or they will burn." The conviction in his voice was absolute. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. A part of her, the small, hopeful part she had kept hidden for so long, dared to believe him. The journey back was a blur. He moved through the deep snow with an unnatural ease, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. The world that had been her prison now seemed small and insignificant from the safety of his arms. When they reached the edge of the Blood Moon territory, he finally set her down. The familiar scent of her pack, Pine smoke and damp earth filled the air, and her anxiety spiked. Before they entered the village, Cale paused. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "This will not be easy for you," he said. "They have made you believe you are nothing. They are wrong." He gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are the other half of my soul. Remember that." News of the Alpha King's arrival spread like wildfire. By the time they reached the central clearing, the entire pack was assembled, their faces a mixture of awe and fear. Alpha Valerius, Lyra's father, stood at the forefront, his expression strained. His eyes flickered from Kyl's imposing form to Ilara, huddled at his side. A flicker of confusion, then utter disbelief crossed his face. Then Lyra saw her, her pretty face contorted into a mask of pure, venomous rage. She pointed a trembling finger at Ilara. "What is that filth doing with you, my king?" she cried, her voice high and shrill. "She is a worthless Omega, the daughter of traitors. She is not fit to stand in your shadow." A low growl rumbled in Kyl's chest, a sound so menacing that the entire pack flinched. The air grew heavy, charged with his power. "You will address your queen with respect," he snarled, the words cracking like a whip. Queen. The word hung in the stunned silence. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Valerius's face went pale. Lyra's mouth opened and closed like a fish, no sound coming out. Cale raised Ilara's hand, displaying the silvery soul mark for all to see. "Fate has chosen," he declared, his voice ringing with indisputable authority. "Ilara is my mate. She is the Luna Queen of all packs. You will show her the fealty you show me." The pack stared, their eyes wide with shock. They looked from the powerful, ancient king to the small, shivering girl they had tormented and abused for her entire life. It was impossible, incomprehensible. But the mark was undeniable. The king's claim was absolute. Lyra, however, was not so easily cowed. Jealousy and ambition were a toxic brew in her veins. She had always believed she was destined for greatness, perhaps even to be the Alpha King's chosen. To see her prize, her birthright, handed to the one person she despised more than anyone was more than she could bear. Later that day, as Ilara was being settled into the Alpha's own chambers, a place of unimaginable luxury she felt she was desecrating with her presence, Lyra's spurned suitor, a brutish pack enforcer named Fendrel, cornered her in the hallway. His eyes were dark with a mixture of lust and resentment. "So, the little mouse found herself a lion," he sneered, blocking her path. "Don't think that mark makes you better than us. I know what you are." He reached out, his hand grabbing her arm. "You belong in the dirt." Before he could do more, a shadow fell over them. Cale stood there, silent and deadly. His golden eyes were no longer warm, they were chips of amber ice. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The sheer force of his killing intent was suffocating. "Take your hand off my mate," he said, the words lethally soft. Fendrel froze, his face draining of color. He snatched his hand back as if burned. "My king, I didn't—" "You have one chance to leave my sight," Cale interrupted, his voice dropping even lower. "If I ever see you look at her again, if I ever hear you speak her name, I will personally tear your throat out." Fendrel scrambled away, practically falling over his own feet in his haste to escape. Cale turned to Ilara, the icy fury in his eyes melting back into concern. He gently took her arm, his fingers tracing the spot where Fendrel had grabbed her. "Did he hurt you?" "No," she whispered, her body still trembling. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, a powerful, reassuring rhythm. "This is your home now," he murmured into her hair. "No one will lay a hand on you here." But the threat was not just from within the pack. Lyra's hatred had found a more dangerous outlet. She saw the soul mark not as a blessing from fate, but as a weakness, a tool, a way to hurt both Alara and the king who had spurned her. She sent a secret message, a desperate plea to a power she did not understand, but was willing to bargain with. She contacted the Ember Covenant. She told them about the girl, the king's fated mate, his one vulnerability. A few weeks passed in a strange, dreamlike state for Alara. She was surrounded by comforts she had never known: soft beds, warm clothes, plentiful food. Kale was a constant, solid presence at her side, his quiet devotion a balm to her wounded soul. He taught her, slowly, what it meant to be his mate. He explained the bond, the way their emotions and strengths were now intertwined. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give, but his possessiveness was a tangible thing, a warm cloak that shielded her from the world. Yet the whispers and glares from the Blood Moon Pack continued. They could not forget who she had been. They could not see her as a queen. And she, in the deepest part of herself, still felt like an imposter, the worthless Omega playing dress-up in a borrowed life. Her self-doubt was a constant, nagging voice, whispering that this was all a mistake, that he would soon realize his error and cast her aside. One evening, while Kale was in a tense council meeting with Alpha Valerius, Alara found herself wandering the pack house, restless. She needed air. Slipping out a side door, she walked into the gardens, the cool night air a welcome relief. The moon was high and full, casting the world in silver and shadow. She did not hear them approach. They moved like smoke, silent and swift. One moment she was alone, the next she was surrounded. Men cloaked in black, their faces obscured by deep hoods. On their chests, they bore the sigil of a smoldering ember, the Ember Covenant. Panic seized her. She opened her mouth to scream, to call for Kale through the bond, but a hand clamped over her mouth, rough and smelling of bitter herbs. A sharp pain pricked her neck, and the world began to tilt and spin. A profound weakness washed over her, a strange coldness that severed the warm hum of her connection to Kale. It was like a vital part of her had been carved out, leaving a gaping, agonizing void. Silver. They had used a silver-laced drug, the one substance that could dampen their bond. The last thing she saw before darkness consumed her was Lyra's triumphant, hate-filled face, watching from the shadows of the pack house. Alara awoke to darkness and the biting chill of stone. She was in a cell, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. Heavy chains, cold and unforgiving, bound her wrists to the wall. The links were thick with silver, and every time she moved, a sickening, draining weakness pulsed through her. The bond, her lifeline to Kale, was a faint, frayed thread. She could feel his distant panic, his frantic rage, but it was like hearing a scream from across a vast ocean. The cell door creaked open, spilling faint torchlight into the gloom. A figure entered, his presence radiating a cold, dark power that made the air feel thin and sharp. He was tall and gaunt, with eyes that held no light, like chips of obsidian. This was not some mere soldier. This was a leader. "The little moon awakens," he said, his voice a dry rustle of dead leaves. "I am Malachor, and you, my dear, are the key to a new era." "What do you want?" Alara's voice was a hoarse whisper. Malachor smiled, a chilling, bloodless expression. "What every shadow wants, to consume the sun. For centuries, Kale has been an immovable object, a beacon of tiresome order. But every sun has a shadow it cannot escape. Every king has a weakness." His obsidian eyes drifted to the faint silver mark on her hand. "You are his." He began to pace, his dark robe sweeping across the filthy floor. We will use you to draw him out, to break him. And once he is gone, the Ember Covenant will rise and burn away the old world. We will sever the ancient pacts that bind our kind to the whims of fate and nature. We will seize power for ourselves." Fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A spark of anger. He spoke of her as a thing, a key, a tool, just like Lyra, just like Fendrel, just like everyone had her entire life. "He will find me," she said, the words holding more conviction than she felt. "Oh, I have no doubt," Malachor said with another chilling smile. "That is the entire point. But by the time he arrives, it will be too late. We have a ritual prepared, a ritual that will not just sever your bond, but invert it. All his strength, all his power will be siphoned through you and into me. He will be left a hollow shell, and you will be the conduit of his destruction." Despair, absolute and crushing, threatened to swallow her. She was going to be the weapon that destroyed the only person who had ever shown her kindness, the only one who had ever made her feel seen. The pain of the weakened bond was a constant throb, a physical ache in the center of her chest. She closed her eyes, trying to focus on that thin, frayed thread connecting her to Cale. Hold on. The thought was not her own. It was his. A desperate, powerful command that echoed in the silence of her mind. "I am coming." The words were a lifeline in the suffocating darkness. He was looking for her. He had not given up. The small, stubborn core of resilience that had kept her alive through years of abuse flared to life. She would not be their weapon. She would not be his downfall. She would hold on. The days blurred into a nightmare of cold, hunger, and a gnawing emptiness where the warmth of the bond used to be. Malachor's followers would come and go, their faces cruel masks of zealotry. They taunted her, calling her the king's folly, the flaw in his perfect armor. And through it all, she clung to Cale's telepathic promise, repeating it like a mantra in the prison of her mind. "I am coming. Hold on." The night of the ritual arrived. The air was heavy with the scent of strange incense and gathering power. They dragged her from her cell, her body weak from the constant exposure to silver, and took her to a vast cavern. A blood-red moon shone through a fissure in the ceiling, bathing the chamber in an ominous light. Malachor stood before a dark, obsidian altar, his arms raised, chanting in a forgotten tongue. They forced her onto the altar, the stone cold as a tomb slab against her back. The silver chains were replaced with bindings of dark energy that crackled and hissed where they touched her skin. Malachor approached, a ritual dagger in his hand, its blade gleaming in the crimson moonlight. "The king is near," he hissed, his eyes alight with manic triumph. "I can feel his rage. He comes for you, and he will walk right into his own grave." He raised the dagger over her heart. The moment its tip was poised to strike, the cavern walls exploded inward. Stone and earth erupted as Cale smashed through the side of the mountain, a force of pure, untamed fury. His eyes were not gold, but blazing suns of white-hot rage. A primal roar of incandescent wrath tore from his throat, a sound that shook the very foundations of the earth. His warriors poured in behind him, a tide of claws and teeth, and the cavern erupted into a maelstrom of battle. Cale saw only her. He cut a swath through the Covenant soldiers, his movements a blur of lethal grace. He was a storm, a god of vengeance, and nothing could stand in his way. Malachor, seeing his plan crumbling, acted with desperate speed. He abandoned the idea of siphoning Cale's power and chose a simpler path, ending the bond by ending her. He plunged the dagger down. Ilara saw the blade descending. She saw Cale fighting to get to her, his face a mask of desperation. He would be too late. In that single, frozen moment, something inside her broke. Not in despair, but in rage. A lifetime of being called worthless, of being hurt, of being used as a pawn. It all coalesced into a single, defiant thought. Number. As the dagger was about to pierce her skin, a light erupted from her body. It was not a gentle glow, but an explosive, blinding wave of pure, silver-white energy, the power of the moon and stars given form. It slammed into Malachor, throwing him back against the far wall with bone-shattering force. The dark bindings holding her disintegrated into dust. The wave of light washed over the entire cavern, and every member of the Ember Covenant screamed as it touched them, their dark magic turning to ash. Ilara rose from the altar, floating an inch above the stone, her body wreathed in shimmering light. Her eyes, once the color of a timid forest floor, now blazed with the silver fire of 1,000 stars. The mark on her hand burned with an intensity that outshone the moon. She had never known this power was inside her. It was a wellspring of life, of light, of pure, elemental force. The spirit of the Luna Queen, dormant for generations, had finally awakened. Kale stopped, his battle fury momentarily forgotten, and stared at her in stunned, reverent awe. She was magnificent, terrifying, beautiful. Malachor struggled to his feet, his body broken but his hatred undiminished. "You were supposed to be nothing," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "A weak, pathetic Omega." Ilara turned her starlit gaze upon him. The voice that came from her lips was not her own timid whisper. It was a voice of ancient power, clear and resonant as a silver bell. "I was never nothing," she declared, the words echoing with the force of creation. "I am Ilara, and you will not touch what is mine." She raised her hand, and a beam of concentrated moonlight shot forth, striking Malachor square in the chest. He did not even have time to scream before he dissolved into a cloud of black dust, which was then scattered by a final, purifying pulse of light. The battle was over. The remaining Covenant soldiers, their leader gone and their dark magic neutralized, surrendered or fled. Silence descended upon the cavern, broken only by the panting of the warriors. The light around Ilara softened, and she sank gently back to the altar, her legs weak. The immense power receded, leaving her exhausted but whole. Kale was at her side in an instant, his hands framing her face, his golden eyes searching hers, filled with a love so profound it made her ache. "You're her," he whispered, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. It was not the same statement as before. This was not just recognition of a mate. This was recognition of her power, her glory. He swept her into his arms, crushing her against him. His lips found hers in a desperate, claiming kiss that was both a fierce assertion of ownership and a tender promise of forever. The bond between them, no longer frayed and weak, flared to life, stronger and brighter than ever before. It was a roaring inferno of shared relief, love, and triumph. She kissed him back, pouring all of her newfound strength, all of her love, all of herself into the connection. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I am so sorry," he breathed. "I should have protected you." She placed a hand on his cheek, her touch now steady and sure. "You came for me," she said, "and I held on." She looked around at the devastation, at the loyal warriors who were now looking at her with expressions of pure reverence. "We saved each other." He smiled, a true, radiant smile that lit up his entire face. "Yes, we did." Their return was not to the Blood Moon Pack, but to Kale's ancestral home, the Skyfang Citadel, a fortress carved into the peak of the highest mountain, its spires scraping the heavens. Here, no one knew her as the Omega Girl. They knew her only as the king's mate, the wielder of light who had single-handedly destroyed the leader of the Ember Covenant. To solidify their union and present her to his people, Kale led her to the Great Hall, a cavernous space dominated by a single, massive throne carved from the living heart of the mountain. It was a seat of immense power, rumored to reject any who were not worthy. He led her before it, the hall packed with the alphas of 100 allied packs. He turned to her, his golden eyes soft. "The bond is not complete until it is accepted by both souls, freely and wholly," he said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "I chose you the moment I saw you. I claim you before all." He held out his hand. A mark, a mirror of hers, a blazing sun encircling a single star, burned itself onto the back of his hand, a brand of his devotion. Now it was her turn. She looked at the powerful king who had seen her when she was invisible, the man who had crossed the world to save her, the mate who saw her not as a weakness, but as his greatest strength. She stepped forward, her heart full. "And I claim you, Kale, Alpha King, my mate, my home." She reached out and placed her hand over his, and both their marks flared with a brilliant, golden-silver light, sealing their bond for all eternity. A roar of approval shook the hall, but Kale's attention was only on her. He guided her toward the throne. She hesitated, the old feelings of unworthiness a faint, dying echo. Could she really sit there? He seemed to understand. He did not force her. Instead, he sat first, the ancient throne accepting him as it always had. Then he pulled her gently into his lap, settling her into the heart of his power, her back against his chest, his arms a protective circle around her. She was not just beside the throne, she was on it, sharing it with him, an extension of his own rule. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. His deep voice was a soft rumble meant only for her, yet it held the weight of a coronation. "It suits you." And in the safety of his embrace, looking out at the sea of loyal faces, with the strength of their completed bond humming in her soul and her own incredible power settled deep in her bones, Elara finally, truly believed him. She was home. She was loved. She was queen.